It's not often that you come across an MSP whose slogan is "Get Shit Done." But that's what drew me to Hosted Network, a local Australian MSP which is doing great things not only in the service provider space, but also from their in-house development, which is now servicing a gap in the market with regards to Proxmox. Yes, we're talking about Broadcom again, we're talking about its impact, but we're also talking to a great innovative MSP, Hosted Network, and also focusing on multi-portal, which is a spin-off and their solution for offering multi-tenant Proxmox support. And in the year 2024, it's all about alternative hypervisors. Today I'm talking with Ben Towns, CEO of Hosted Network. Don't forget to head to YouTube at GTWGT Podcast or on all good podcasting platforms. Hit like, subscribe, and follow to get all past episodes. And now, episode 89 with Ben Towns from Hosted Network. Hey Ben, so Ben, founder and CEO of Hosted Network. Welcome to episode 89 of GTWGT. It's been a while since I've talked to a service provider, MSP in the purest sense on the show, but also from an Australian perspective as well. Great to be talking to an Australian service provider as well. And, you know, also from a great Veeam partner at the same time, though on this show, that doesn't matter, it's secondary, but always good to have as well. But welcome, Ben.
Thanks, mate. Thanks for having me.
No worries. So, hey, it's an exciting time for you guys. Hosted Network have been around for a while, started off as an MSP, went into sort of infrastructure hosting, and now, we're going to talk about this a bit later on, releasing something for Proxmox multi-portal. We'll get into that later, but firstly, talk about a little bit about Hosted Network, what you guys do, what you're doing today, and then we'll look into, where it all started for you.
Yeah, sure. So Hosted Network is a wholesale cloud and telco provider for Aussie managed service providers. Today, we support over 250 MSPs across Australia, and that's primarily everything from connectivity through to infrastructure and the surrounding pieces, so voice and security and so forth. We are a fully feedback-driven company, so everything that we've built is pretty much being built in-house based off the feedback from our partners. We like to sort of, what do they say, fail fast. And so that's what we have. We're probably more of a development company that front ends as a cloud and telco provider.
That's interesting.
Yeah, we sort of way back when one of my first companies that I founded way before Hosted Network was actually a development company. So we kind of think a bit like that.
Yep.
Yeah, so that sort of development mindset, tooling and all of that is all kind of, with that in mind. So yeah.
Yeah. So in 2003 started, but it started as an MSP. So this is pretty typical of a journey, of a managed service provider at that time, looking at spaces to fill, helping other MSPs to serve their own customer base. What was it like back then? What made you start and found Hosted Network? And also Hosted Network, not networks, which I think people
correct. Yeah, the domain name
say.
Was what? Yeah, we're an IT company. We're not the most original when it comes to marketing names.
Yep. You find that often, because I made that same mistake as well, just typing in Hosted Networks.
I think we actually own the domain name finally now, but yeah,
I was going to say it's worth a cheeky redirect, I reckon.
It is.
So yeah, talk about 2003.
Yeah, so 2003. So I didn't actually found the managed service provider. I founded Hosted Network. So I'm a network engineer and virtualization engineer by trade. And I got burnt out of IT, and I decided to reskill, speaking of marketing, and I went into marketing. And I actually started a marketing agency. And turned out the only people that I knew were in IT. So I was doing marketing for IT and
not really escaping.
Not really escaping in any way, shape, or form. But there was some really good, back when you could, make money off web hosting and things like that. It was, early days before cloud was a thing. And Hosted Network was actually born because one of my customers at the time, who we were, doing not just marketing, but a lot of consulting for, I tried to tell them that cloud was going to be a thing, and they didn't believe me. And so I went, cool, I think cloud is going to be a thing. And yeah, we sort of, we merged, we bought into a managed service provider who they started in 2003. And yeah, we sort of started Hosted Network a couple of years later after that. So, and turns out cloud was a thing. So I was pretty happy with that gamble.
Yeah. I mean, and look, obviously at that time, 2006, I've been in hosting, probably been in hosting for a long time, and actually since, all my career. And there was definitely interesting transitional periods around 2006, 7 hosting. It was really moving from partner hosted solutions, just pretty much almost like backyarding type of thing because it was the Wild West. Lots of hosting
Oh, it
providers were
was.
popping up doing ISPs, Linux-based hosting, Windows hosting, hosted applications like Exchange. 2006, 7 is really when AWS was just forming. Microsoft was working out that they could probably do what their partners were doing and do it on a larger scale. Um, so really interesting times. But from the point of view of how you saw it then, what drew you into that world back then? Apart from obviously networking, you were in that world from a technical perspective, but then going, hey, I think I can take this and grow a company around it.
Yeah, so I guess for us it was one of those things that we thought we could do it better. I came from back in my MSP days when I used to work in an MSP. Everything we did was enterprise, and so a lot of the hosting. You're right. It was the wild wild west, and a lot of the hosting that we were seeing was being built based off realistically desktop hardware sold as physical infrastructure or servers. In Australia, that in many cases it wasn't in data centers. Data centers was still a very early concept, nowhere near the numbers that we've got now. And so for us, it was to try and bring that enterprise level of solution to the SMB, right? And that's where we felt we could make our mark, and we did. It worked really, really well as an MSP. When we sort of came together with that MSP, we quickly basically sold. We were a Citrix shop at the time, actually.
Okay, yes,
And
yes.
so, yeah, Zen app at the time. And so we very quickly moved everyone into that sort of cloud sort of model, delivering as what we called at the time desktop as a service.
Yep.
Right. So before VDI, and that flowed on from there. We wanted more performance, basically. Right. And so we started, we were back in the day when VMware bought a company called Destone.
I know. Well, got lots of links to that. That's for sure. Know it very well.
We were one of the launch partners in Australia for when VMware purchased that company for their desktop as a server. There was Horizon DAS back then.
Yes.
So we were, we brought NetApp, they brought SolidFire for a tidy 1.2 billion. So we were the launch partner for all flash arrays back then. And we were doing some crazy all around VDI. And a lot of that sort of our service offering, even today, was tied into that sort of infrastructure piece of it, right? So with VDI, obviously, it's a user experience based thing, right? So we then had to bring in our own activity to control latency, to get have more control, sort of from there was no finger pointing, those sort of things when my telco's. So we wanted control, and that's kind of how things grew. So today we don't do much in terms of VDI. We're actually sort of end of lifing most of it as hosted network, but that was kind of as a infrastructure provider, kind of how we grew, trying to bring that that enterprise play to the SMB.
And that's always difficult. Like I was in that space as well. I mean, I think about my first few days at Zetagrid when we're now talking early 20 or mid 2013. We were using the Horizon View had just released. Where I remember deploying that software. We were using VMware Cloud Director to front it. It was kind of going to be that next big thing. I remember having an iPad and Horizon app on the iPad, and you could do your desktop there on the iPad. It was all it was brilliant, right? Like it was good times. But I guess it was always hard to balance up user expectation, business expectation around what was a hosted desktop, delivering the apps and what that actually meant. And then obviously as a hosting provider, how do you actually deliver on that promise? And 9 times out of 10, it was always disparate, difficult to do, because all the normal problems around hosting things, storage, co-tenancy, noisy neighbors, it all came up, right? So to your point, if you dedicated yourself towards that, you could actually end up growing your infrastructure quite nicely and creating some real scale and some really nice platform there, right? Automation, process. If you were half in it, which is basically what most people were, and not really focused on it as a main line of business, then you probably failed pretty quickly at it. Like I know that we did, it never took off, right? It was kind of cool. So, you guys were the ones that actually took Desktone and took those calls from VMware, probably from a Sunga probably back then, right?
It
And
was, yeah.
yeah, definitely, you
Well,
know.
he's over at Veeam now, right? So,
Oh no, well he was at Veeam. No, he's at Sneak now. Hey Asanga.
oh right, moved on
Yeah,
again.
yeah, yeah. He moved on again. He's looking after Sneak, but yeah, but it was him. But yeah, trying to sell it in, and you know, I know that we kind of looked at it and went, nah, not for us. Lots of. We need to do a lot here to get this going. It's our core focus. But good on you for doing that. So, okay, so VDI, desktop as a service, pretty critical to leverage that from an MSP point of view. And then in that around that time, you definitely transitioned to a channel only model. So what does that mean when a company like yourself, an MSP, transitions into that sort of model?
So we effectively moved away from selling direct to end customers and selling through partners, right? So the reason for that was, if I put my marketing hat on back from our marketing agency days, we converted all of those existing end customer leads that our managed service provider had, and then we tried to go after more leads, online advertising, things like that. And what we were finding is that every sort of third lead that was coming through was for a managed service provider going, oh hey, I can see a lot of those benefits to a hosted VDI solution, but they either didn't have the budget, they didn't have the technical know-how, skills, or they just didn't have the time to learn it. And so they were kind of like, okay, well, can you deliver that for us? And it was through that sort of market demand that we went, oh, there's a bit of a gap here. And initially, while it was just VDI, the desktop as a service offering, we kind of expanded from there pretty quickly. And we pretty much stopped doing any retail. We split off that and focused 100% on channel, selling through those managed service providers. So that really helped us align. I love talking about common language. So we're talking, if anyone's talking about, targeting a vertical, it really did allow us to kind of go deep because we could understand the pain points that they were going through, and we could talk the same language. If anyone's trying to, I don't know, support the receptionist with a printer issue, you're not, it's always frustrating when you're talking tech to tech. You could really get things done. And so we got to be the propeller heads, and we let them do the steps.
That's interesting, right? And then, so did you guys have a front end or a control panel at the time that you kind of allowed it, so to speak, credit card swipe or active payments of the infrastructure as a service or the desktop as a service, whatever you were doing back then? Or was it not as evolved back then, and that made it easy to sort of go towards that channel because you kind of closed that end and then focus on the channel?
There was definitely a transition. We used still around now. This brings me back to web hosting days. WHDS.
Yep.
A billing platform, and we transitioned away. We had some pretty major issues. This is a long time ago, bringing me back now. And
that's what we do here. I love going back to memories.
We basically made the decision because of some issues that we were facing with that, and we kind of went all in, and we expanded our dev team and our DevOps team to basically turn around and go, let's just build everything in-house. So
that's important.
Oh, I can't remember how many years ago it was now. But we basically went, we want control, right? And it was the same reason we were doing telco, right? We wanted that control because we wanted to deliver on those customer outcomes. So that ordering life cycle, everything from how customers order through how they, troubleshoot through to how they bill, everything that we do is custom built in-house.
Control it end to end.
Well, yeah, and because we're going after a vertical, like managed service providers, they operate in a particular way, right? So we wanted to sort of go deep with their user experience and really align. Hosted network fundamentally makes our partners more profitable, not because of the services that we sell. It's the fact that when they do buy something from us, it's so well aligned with that end-to-end service lifecycle to how they operate that they get those operational efficiencies across the board. Time to resolutions quicker, invoicing, the cost of reconciliation, all of those bits and pieces are decreased because we've gone so deep with how they operate. And that there was nothing out of the box that we could do that. So, and we, in a way, we did stumble into that sort of piece of it, but it was that mindset of going, no, we want control. We want to be able to respond to feedback quicker, rather than waiting for someone else's development cycle. We could kind of turn around and go, you know what? Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's give it a go. Let's get that out in market.
And I think that's true of any MSP or any traditional MSP that got into hosting or got into PBX, cloud, telco, um, really had to do it and fail quickly in certain parts to understand what
Mm.
they were lacking, right? And it's the same as here in Australia. It's the same in the States and in Europe. If you were an MSP focused with people, it only went so far because those types would go, oh, we can do the hosting. It seems easy. No worries. We'll do it. And then typically these guys, and I've seen it, I've seen hundreds of these companies think they can do it. And then ultimately it all sort of blows up in their face because either they're not scaled correctly, they haven't got the right engineering, they haven't got the right development, the right levels of automation, procurement, whatever it is. And then there's the other ones which were born from, say, a development company. And there's the company that I used to work from, Zetagrid, actually episode number 1 of this podcast now, almost over 4 years ago. Zetagrid was born because there was developers in that initial MSP company that were doing automation. And they thought maybe we can apply this to the cloud and this thing that's coming up. Whereas I think you kind of went the other way where you kind of tried a little bit and said, we've got to get better at the automation piece and we're going to do everything in-house. And if you don't do either one of those things, I found that those MSPs that tried hosting just failed pretty badly, right?
Yeah, and I think that a lot of particularly these days, and if thanks to Microsoft and what they've done with Azure and whatnot, they really did shine a light on a lot of those MSPs or TSPs as they want to, people often call
They are
them.
TSPs now. So that was my last
TSPs.
episode. Technical service providers.
Technical, that's it. That sort of it challenged their way of thinking, and realizing that for the same reason that most managed service providers don't want to run a telco network, because you've got to have network engineers, you've got to take that next level up of technical skill, and that you need realistically you need a decent amount of volume to actually be able to justify that level of investment, and continually reinvesting in that, not just in terms of equipment, but the skill. Right? If you look at the industry as a whole, it changes so rapidly, and when we're dealing with kind of very very technical aspects, whether it be networking or data center services and things like that, it's a different kettle of fish to say to typical 365 tenant administration, migrations, project work, things like that. So it's they're very complementary, but fundamentally they're a different skill.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the services that you guys offer, and we won't spend a lot of time on this, but I think it's important to talk about the services. So infrastructure as a service, desktop as a service, which you said you're kind of transitioning out of. And the reason why we're quite close today from a partnership perspective, meaning Veeam and ourselves, you do backup as a service. But then you've also got the telco side, which is the hosted PBX, the SIP trunks, NBN and all that kind of jazz. So very well rounded in terms of your service offerings and that go-to shop for your MSP partners there. And obviously the development arm is very important in that. Like what part of the business would you say today is innovative more than the other, or is it just end to end, in terms of the services that you're offering?
So connectivity and voice, for example, are definitely more commoditized. So we have to innovate in that sense more to make sure that we have a better value proposition in market. We have to make sure that we're not burning margin. Because basically you can take one support call for an internet connection, you can lose that margin, particularly being in wholesale. So we've got to work smart, right? So we're investing in our platform more and more. The headcount in our development team is probably increasing at a much faster rate than any other department in our company, and that's because we're trying to take advantage of things like AI. We're trying to improve the user experience so that when tickets come through, we're not having to touch as many of them. You mentioned NBN. We have the best fault to service ratio of any telco in Australia because of that.
Okay.
Of any, even versus the big guys, right? And that's because that means we don't just go and pass the buck to NBN, right? Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that if we are passing it through, it's a legitimate issue. And our tooling and the way that we work and the way that we operate allows us to deliver a better time to resolution, which again, because we're going deep with an MSP, that's what they care about, because fundamentally time is money for a managed service provider.
Absolutely.
Obviously the end customer, that impacts them as well, but a managed service provider has to support that service. So for us, that sort of time to resolution and our way of thinking. So we're really having to be quite, creative in that sense. And, we are leveraging things like AI. We're looking at, when someone uploads, photos of a router, for example, we automatically, we're trying to look at what the lights are on the router. What are the,
That's cool.
those sort of things. And then we look back at the APIs that we get from NBN and go, cool, let's automatically run the diagnostics. We, automatically parse our logs from our assist logs to try and compile what that actually looks like to get to a faster resolution rather than sort of swivel chairing these things.
Yeah, AI, a big proponent of using it. Like the tooling that we have at the moment is crazy in terms of what we can do with it, and being able to leverage it to make things more efficient is super important. In terms of your development, so we're going to talk about multi-portal in in a couple of minutes. I want to cover Broadcom before we get to the flow into multi-portal because it's a beautiful narrative. But what other things that you mentioned in the pre-chat? We've become this development company first and foremost, and then obviously that offshoots into the MSP world. Has there been anything that you guys have actually developed like that has become obviously multi-portal as one? Is there anything else that you've done in that sort of vein as well?
Yeah, so we have no longer because we sold it late last year. It was an alert platform called Alert Centric, right? So we would take all of the backup alerts and things like that for Veeam and data, whatever it is basically, and simplify and try and remove the errors out of backup checks. And that was a spin-off just internally because we were frustrated with internal issues. And then we found the same pain point. So that's sort of, and we've got there's another platform that we built internally called Project Guardian, where we basically filter against syslogs and security alerts, automatically black holing potential, threat actors across our national network, but also, off-net scan for vulnerabilities, open ports, high-risk services, and present that information back to our partners so that they can proactively, monitor those services and ideally patch them. Our thinking, again, because we're channel focused, is that if our customers are impacted or if they lose a customer, we lose a customer. So looking at those different ways of being creative, of sort of going, okay, cool, how can we add extra value, but how can we, make our customers look like heroes?
So do they become spin-offs out? It's kind of like skunk working a little bit, right, internally, where you're creating, maybe from a hackathon internally, or just some free time, someone's getting in there and creating that sort of stuff.
Lots of pizza.
Yeah, love the pizza. Love that. As long as it's pizza, it's all good. But then do you spin that out? Do you then take that, like you mentioned, you sold one. That's really cool that you're able to do that. Is there more value in you guys? Or clearly there's some value, but what's the mental sort of, from a business perspective, spinning that out versus keeping it and growing it internally? I'm interested in that.
Yeah. So all of these ideas come from our feedback from our partners. Realistically, they come from pain points that's happening in market, or where we see that there's a gap. Someone's complaining about something that they wish there was something like this. We integrate with all of the major PSAs, for example, from a billing perspective, right? And that came because one of our partners, frankly, forgot to bill a fiber service at $500 a month for 2 years. But we sort of it hurts, right? So a lot of that stuff is from that level of feedback, and then we do go through that sort of skunk work, that sort of hackathon approach, where an idea, we like to sort of do that MVP approach, minimal viable product, and get it in people's hands, right? So feedback cycle is basically, get something in there. What we think might be a great idea, if we spend years and years and years on it, we could get it in market and everyone might turn around and go, no. And that's what we've found in many cases. If I look at, say, whether it be our I'll use our PSA integrations, managed service providers, even though they're one vertical, they configure their PSAs in totally different ways, right? So, and everyone builds in slightly different ways as well. And so, we have to accommodate for those things. So what we do is we get some early adopters, and we get that sort of feedback cycle going, and then we just continually innovate from there. We build and build. That kind of, my team would, they'd laugh at me saying this because I say it way too often, but crawl before you walk before you run. Get that minimal viable product, get it in people's hands, see what they think, and then get real world feedback. because at the end of the day, we're not necessarily the ones using it day in, day out.
Yeah, that's interesting. So let's turn it to multi-portal. But before we talk about that, really interesting itself, and a great example of filling a space in the market which potentially needed to be filled because of necessity, right? Talk about Broadcom. I mean, it's been talked a lot this year. I've focused on it with a lot of platforms, alternative hypervisors, and whatnot. How has it directly impacted your business, your MSPs, and their customers?
It's a pain in the ass.
You can say that.
A lot of sleepless nights early on, mainly because obviously the
Mm,
Broadcom situation, just not knowing what the hell was going on, and even
yeah,
today, there's a lot of
yeah.
unknown.
Fluid,
Um,
right? Fluid.
it is a very fluid situation. So from our perspective, we didn't know what was going on, right? So we knew something was coming, and we had to sort of go, okay, well, what's our risk profile looking like? And which is in the end, if I look at our desktop as a service platform, that's why we end of lifed it,
Mm,
because the Broadcom, it became too hard.
yeah,
For the in terms of multi-portal, we started early on. We had a side project already, one of those sort of hackathon sort of projects internally that we were working on, and we 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 were looking for alternatives to VMware and vCloud Director for probably about 3 years ago. We sort of started the
yep.
concept, and then we were just expecting someone to provide that functionality. I just assume that and it still surprises me today that there isn't someone else out there that sort of built for something other than VMware, with a
Yeah.
true tenancy approach.
Yeah, I mean, there was OnApp, and there was a few others that existed, but then VMware acquired OnApp and kind of destroyed it internally. There's a few there that did do this, but they just because VMware was able to. There was a period definitely when I remember being in the thick of this withZetagrid, being at VMworld, showing them what we had bought from an NSX point of view when NSX was out and how to integrate it. And then they went through a period saying that they were going to no longer develop the UI. It was going to be all API based.
Oh,
If you remember
yeah,
that,
I
so
do.
they caused lots of FUD in the market. Then more uncertainty and doubt and fear about which way you're going. But then they doubled down on that. Said no, the UI is strong. We're going to go down hard with it. And here's what they've done. And then they to their credit, they did that. And I think that basically stopped anyone really looking seriously at innovating to fill that space, which was potentially going to be void because of the API only approach. Because let's be honest with you, the UI and the UX experience has been pretty damn good since they made that decision.
It
Right?
has. Yeah.
They've done really well. So Broadcom has come in now and caused different waves. In terms of it's not really about VCD anymore. It's about what's underneath it. That's the problem, right? That's the
Yeah.
uncertainty. So that's where we're at today. But yeah, I mean, from that point of view, I mean, from an alternative hypervisor perspective, obviously you've seen something in Proxmox, but what are people actively moving away from VMware? I obviously think the answer that you're going to sell me is yes, but how do you take that? How do you see that in market with your 250 MSPs?
So we originally, funnily you mentioned back when VMware weren't using the UI, a little bit of history. We built a full front end
Mm,
for and so we already sort of had those skills internally and a bit of the code, I guess, as well. But
yep.
When this approach happened, we're quite heavily involved with a lot of the MSP communities, the business communities, the peer groups and whatnot. The feedback was, no, we're just going to ditch our whole stack, or we're moving to something else. We're done. People were
Yep.
just frustrated, and so we put up a couple of Reddit posts sneakily in the VMware subreddit and whatnot, and we had so many people contact us, and we realized, we're like, you know what, cool, all right, we're already working on this internally. We're just going to make it an external project. And since then, just like with anything else we do, it's a feedback loop, right? So Proxmox as a platform, I think a lot of people are looking at it as an alternative, and a lot of people already ran it realistically.
Yeah. Yep.
a lot of people were running management work. I know we have for years, right? Running
Interesting.
management workloads on it and things like that. So I think a lot of those skills, it was a natural progression. The other one that we saw in market was obviously, Hyper-V. And I
Hmm.
know Microsoft some things, on the
Yeah,
roadmap from that.
trying. They're trying.
Yeah, but there's never been kind of that much of a buy-in for Hyper-V, whereas I felt
Mm.
that talking to people, a lot of the hosting providers or telcos or managed service providers that we were in our community were already using Proxmox, so it was a natural sort of progression for them.
Isn't that interesting? I just want to sort of ask there, is it so from the point of view of hosting management stacks, maybe the telco stack on a Proxmox, was that from a price perspective just the best way to do it? I mean, I know, there's technical reasons why, but for me, if I was thinking about it today, like, do I really want to include, certain VMs that are doing this sort of workload in my VMware reporting every month? Because holy crap, it's a bit more expensive. And it seems like it's going to be okay on the Proxmox thing. It's running fine. Other people are doing it. The mentality there, I think, leads itself to that. But I'm curious as to why you guys and others go down that path, especially in APJ, no, ANZ, I'll say, parts of the EMEA, not so much in America, not so much in the northern parts of Asia. There's clumps of this happening in the world, but it's not all over the place at the same time.
Yeah, you're right. And I think that cost definitely is probably the starting point for most people,
Mm,
to sort of step up management workloads. I don't want to have to pay a premium. At the end of the day, businesses are typically for profit, and so that sort of comes into it from that aspect of it. The other thing I think about, when it comes down to Proxmox is that, like ESX, it is a great turnkey solution.
mm.
If I look at the likes of OpenStack and whatnot, there's a
Oh,
lot of moving parts,
yeah, a bit
right?
nasty.
It
Yeah.
just it requires a very deep investment in technical skills, right? And it's not just the cost of those skills, it's the availability of those skills. I think
Hmm.
that was something that VMware really had, that was, you learn it at university or college or whatever it might be, right? Whereas, now, unfortunately, I think a lot of that's going to disappear. And
Yeah.
so it was the natural hypervisor for a lot of people, because that's what we ran our labs on at home.
Hmm.
And that's
Yep.
starting to transition. If you think of that sort of trajectory, that, the uni students had their labs running on, VMware,
Yeah.
that's
Yep.
transitioned heavily over Proxmox now. A lot of people do that in that sense. And that's probably because it is quite a turnkey solution,
It
right? So it's
is.
a natural, you can stand it up. It's, you don't need 100 different moving parts. You don't have to install a UI, and you don't have to install a separate this and a separate that. And that's kind of what we were, attracted to it for. We were already running those management workloads, but that sort of go-to-market timeframe was very attractive, right? And I
All
think
right.
that with Proxmox, they did a great, and a little bit sneaky. They jumped on the Broadcom bandwagon as well when
Of-
they did their live import script.
Yeah.
And that kind of really cemented that. And there was a lot of initially early people sort of saying, "Oh, hey, what does that migration path look like?" But they've made a really clean
They
job
made it
of,
easy. Yeah.
yeah, they've made it easy, right? And I know that you can move into OpenStack, and if you've got those skills already and you've got that made that investment, then that probably already makes sense for you.
Mm. So
But
talk,
for the
yeah. So talk about, yeah, multi-portal. We've got about 7 or 8 minutes left. Talk about multi-portal and what that is, and why you decided to go down the path, and why you also decided to make it kind of, it is a separate kind of entity that I can see to hosted network.
yeah. So Multi-portal is our multi-tenanted, big cloud director competitor for Proxmox. We were building it internally for us. Like I said, it came out of some Reddit posts, and due to frustration, I think that we're talking to some major providers out of Europe and the US, and that a lot of other people are feeling the pain. Our intention is to take a lot of the, I guess, the headaches that we've had as a provider, as a cloud provider, that we've learnt from the VMware world, and try and simplify a few of those bits and pieces as well, keeping in that sort of turnkey solution. So, if anyone's actually deployed our alpha of it, it's very kind of next, you're done, away
Hmm.
you go. You can
Yeah.
kind of use it. Whereas if you think of like anyone that's used, say, vCloud Director, that the update and the maintenance and the installation is a lot more. There's a lot more to it.
Yeah. Oh,
And we
absolutely. Yeah.
we wanted to keep it kind of nice and simple and turnkey. The goal is to really provide an easy to use multi-tenanted, that a management interface that allows for a nice, clean transition from vCloud Director or whatever it else
Yeah.
might be it Azure realistically, to allow sort of, whether it be managed service providers or cloud service providers, to sort of run their own workloads on Proxmox. And we've got some plans that we're sort of looking at how we can do the same thing with Hyper-V in the same UI and those as well. They're early days at this stage, but the intention is to sort of to try and keep it as a separate piece of it. We don't want to sort of get into the weeds of that. I think Proxmox does a good job, or Hyper-V does a good job of what they do. So it's about the management and the billing and the provisioning of those workloads that I think
important.
That's where the gap is. It is, right? And if you go back to our managed service provider roots and that what hosted network does, it focuses on that end-to-end service lifecycle to get that operational efficiency, right? So we're sort of trying to take the same train of thought with multi-portal and making sure that it's easy, realistically. Easy to manage workloads, easy to provision, easy to stand up,
And are you running it yourselves, or is it something that you would obviously sell to other providers as well? So I think maybe a bit of both potentially, but so provider goes to you, goes onto multiportal.io, has a look at it, downloads, installs it, can then work out to connect. Can you connect Proxmox environments that are disparate to the network, so on premises all into one, or is it all kind of more about a hosted Proxmox solution, much like what VMware would be doing with VCD?
Closer to what VMware would be doing with VCD, I guess. So you, at the end of the day, it's a Ubuntu install at this stage that is prepackaged. We install packages on a Ubuntu, a clean Ubuntu install, and you can connect multi-portal to, as long as you've got connectivity to your Proxmox environments, then you can manage multiple different Proxmox from there, right? So
if you got the network together, you could basically have one hosted somewhere, and then if you had the network connectivity to multiple clients, you could basically hook it in, and
you can just plumb them all in and give your customer a single management URL to go, hey, these are your workloads, and then it doesn't matter where they are, they can kind of manage them across all of those locations, but from a single pane of glass.
Yeah, I love it, because it's obviously, there's Proxmox don't have that themselves, right?
No.
So for you to come and build that on top of that and fill a hole is really innovative in itself, right? And I think goes back to what you were talking about earlier about, your transition from an MSP initially and into all the hosted services, understanding that, like we talked about, from a host to succeed, they need that automation development arm nowadays. And through a little side project and a gap, you've brought out what I see as being quite an interesting project, but I think it can be quite successful as well, because it fills that immediate gap that people need today in the market, which is, how do we get off VMware? We love elements of it. I'm going to miss certain parts of it, and this is probably the biggest part I'm going to miss. So what are my options out there? And now basically multi-portal can do that from a Proxmox perspective.
Yes, the intention is that it's at the end of the day, we are a VMware house. We have been for a long time. But Broadcom's caused a lot of unknown. A lot of sleepless nights, and I think that you kind of don't know what they're going to do, even if you do stick with them for the time being. So we wanted to provide another path for ourselves, and like I said, based off that feedback that we've been getting anyway, and so it's designed to be simple, that provides an as close as possible experience, but not directly copying it. We think there's a lot of things that can be improved, and which we've done.
You're talking about MVP feedback.
Correct.
That's
and that's the feedback cycle now, right? And we're getting, we're in that sort of rapid development. So getting, we take an initial version, we get it in people's hands, and we collect that feedback, and we stir and repeat. We're at we were probably at beta. I think our beta launch is probably in about 2 weeks. And so we're probably, our initial, if I stop adding features and keep getting shiny coin and stop getting excited over things, we'll probably be in production in, a couple of months. So
Awesome. Good stuff. Hey, I love this conversation. We're out of time. I think one of the things that I love about hosted networks, one of the unique value props is you get shit done. And that's like, it's on your website. You're not so Aussie. I love it. Get shit done. That's what you guys are doing, and you're doing it in the Proxmox space. You've been doing it in MSP space since 2003. Looking forward to seeing where multi-portal goes and what you guys are doing in the MSP space. But Ben, Hey, it's been great to have you on for episode 89 of Great Things with Great Tech.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, just as a reminder, thanks for listening to this episode. Stay tuned for more episodes where we continue to highlight companies and technologies shaping our world. Don't forget to follow us on social media at G2WGT Podcast and visit g2wgt.com for more great content and all past episodes. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube. Please spread the word, and if you feel like it, drop a review. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Great Things with Great Tech.